and emptiness is not different from form. This is an easy statement to make, but it's a very profound, and it has a lot of logical consequences as well. It says in logic, A equals B, but then it reverses it and says B equals A. Not all formula is that way. Sometimes A equals B, but B does not equal A. But in this case, the Buddhists were saying emptiness and form are absolutely not different. They are the same. And that's why when I look out here and see you in this classroom, the form that I'm looking at is emptiness. And that was what he was trying to get my students to do, was to understand what the meaning of this verse is. The sutra goes on to say that in emptiness there's a lack of form, but there's no feeling, cognition, impulse, consciousness. In Buddhism, this is a very famous formula of the 5 skandhas. And it goes on to say something which a lot of people interpret, as did my students, as nothing, almost nihilism. There is a lack of eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. If a text says that to us, then how are we to interpret that other than a kind of voidness? It seems as if there is nothing left. So how can it be that I see emptiness? It's not that I'm blinded to it. It is what I participate in every day. The Buddha described the world in terms of the text, and I use the word sensorium. I know it's a big word, and it's not so often used anymore, but it's still a very good equivalent for the so-called 18 dhatus. The 18 dhatus are the sense organs, their objects, and the consciousness that arises from them. All of that put together is the sensorium. That is our whole sensory system, from our so-called organs to what we perceive with them and how we process the information that comes to us. So our sensorium, the question is, why did the Buddhists put such a focus on the sensorium? If you count the number of times in the Buddhist text that it says, no eye, ear, nose, taste, tongue, it's hundreds of times. Why in the world did this religion put such a focus on the sensorium? Why did a religion which everyone has always tried, or many people have tried to say is completely a transcendent tradition, why would it make as one of its primary teachings the sensorium, the sense organs, the perceptive process? I think that this is one of the things that has always separated Buddhism from other religions, as far as I can tell. I don't know of any other religious tradition which has taken this approach, and it's not just that they give it a little bit of focus. They are really saying this is where enlightenment starts. If you want to become enlightened, the first thing that you have to deal with is the nature of the sensorium. And if you don't understand the process of the sensorium, then you can't start. That's the starting point. So that's why I think the Buddha constantly would remind everybody, before I go any farther, he would say, let's get this straight about the senses, their objects, and what our brain does with them. And why is it so important? It is so important because it is human experience. That is what human experience is. That's what we experience in our everyday life. That's what we live with. If we can't deal with our human experience, then Buddhists are saying you can't start down that road of understanding the nature of things as they really are, and to understand the place that your experience has in the whole of creation, the world in which we live. This Samyutta Nikaya basically says, eye, ear, nose, taste, touch, is all sarva, sava in Pali. It's all of human experience. That's all that human experience is. The Samyutta says it. The sensorium is our human experience, and anything else is mere talk. They absolutely rejected anything else other than the sensorium. We live and experience the world through our senses and through our mind or brain. And anything else, said the ancient, is just mere talk. You cannot say there is something else to human experience. Now comes as a big surprise to a lot of people. A lot of people believe that there is a great deal more than human experience. That there is something that goes into the transcendent realm which is not, we are not able to measure and to talk about and see and feel and touch and taste. Nevertheless, I think we have to take quite seriously that the Buddhists were saying, for human experience, that's it. And if you have anything beyond this, for them, it was not the experience that people have. Even in the depth of meditation, it is still a part of the sensorium. It still is part of the way in which our body and brain and whole system process data and make use of it. We never are outside of this in terms of experience. So, Dan Lusthouse has written a book on Emptiness, and I like that he used the example of eating an apple. And the question is, like when I eat an apple, what's happening to me? My brain tells me that there is this wonderful object, sweet and juicy, and I love it. And it's got all of these attributes which attract me. It's outside of me. I'm taking it into me. I'm trying to understand eating an apple, something as commonplace as eating an apple. Our observation of it deceives us. The brain always can deceive us. The brain is so good at this. The brain can produce for us almost anything, I think, and because that's our sensorium, that's what we experience. The brain tells me when I'm eating an apple that it is a real thing. It grew on a tree, it has peeling, it's got seeds, it's got taste, it has texture, and it is separate from me. But the problem is that the Buddhists already knew that perception is just in the brain, the mind. That perception is not seeing the external. that eating an apple is just what you see in the second picture up here. There's a little tiny yellow frame which has been blown up by the artist here. And that's where neural transmitters are occurring in the brain. So when I taste an apple, what happens for my experience is just this. And without this, I would have no experience of the apple. In other words, my brain puts together and I give it all sorts of names. I say, it's really delicious. It's a red apple. It's a crisp apple. I have all sorts of ways to talk about it as if it were that I was really experiencing it and seeing it. But our observations are not the thing itself. And that's why the Buddhists say the sensorium is where you start with understanding how to deal with experience. It's not that the Buddhists ever say there's nothing out there. They are not nihilists. They never say there's no apple. They never say that. What they do say is, I will never know it directly. My experience of it, whatever it is indirect. I will never precisely know what an apple is. And yet I will eat them all my life. That's the irony of our human experience, is that we are presented with this concept, apple, and we think that that concept of the apple is that physical thing that's outside of us. And the Buddhists were trying to say, it isn't. We have an idea of an apple. That's what we live with. We have an idea of what it tastes like. So with this, I think in order for us to understand seeing emptiness, we really have to think about the senses. We have to understand that if we have experiential process, it means we're seeing, we're smelling, we're tasting, and all those little things are happening in our brain. And the synapses are working, and the neurotransmitters are functioning, and the chemicals are flowing, and the electricity is buzzing, and we're having all kinds of experiences. Non-experiential would be anything which is beyond our physical ability to see, hear, smell, taste. Now, in one way, what we've done in the modern world is we've said, aha, if my poor old brain can't do it, I'm going to give it some help. If my eyes can't see, I'm going to put in glasses. I just had a cataract surgery, so I'm very aware of eyes these days. And I realized that I have been seeing the world wrongly through dark cataracts for some years, and I didn't even know that it had happened to me. I didn't know that I had this brown stuff that was covering up my vision, and that I wasn't seeing blue very well, and that I wasn't seeing enough light, and that my eyes were deceiving me. So when I came out of having this operation and I began to look around, it was thrilling. I truly loved, and I do to this still right now because it's new to me, I love to look at you because you're all so washed clean. You look so brilliant. Your clothes are really vibrant. My perception in the past, I took to be the real thing. Now I'm looking at you and I take this to be the real thing. But I suppose if in the future they may figure out a way to expand my color range, and I will see you completely in a different way. So the eye perceives form. So form is emptiness. The eye perceives it, but by the time the eye transmits that information along the optic nerve, that is no longer the apple that I'm seeing. That's why the Buddhists do have a little joke. One text says, if you could experience fire, you'd have smoke coming out of your ears. But you don't. Why? There's no fire in you. You feel heat, but there's no fire in you. Your receptors are giving you information. And your brain, our brain makes this wonderful picture of it. And so I live within this spectrum, and I really feel that I've come home to it. I asked the doctor, am I seeing color better than I've ever seen in my whole life? Because you put this plastic in me that's absolutely crystal clear. When I was a baby, was my lens this clear? And he said, probably yes. We are born with absolutely clear lenses. So over time, we change, and what we can see and how we see it depends on our receptors, depends on the sensorium. It is always back to the sensorium. So color, I'm telling you, I hope you don't mind me talking about this because I'm so enamored with color these days. What upsets me in a way is that in terms of the physics of color, and the physics of color becomes really important to me. Without color, you can have no form. If everything was white, you would have no form. If everything was black, you would have no form. Color gives us form. But physically, nothing has color. Nothing has color. I look and I see, here's a beautiful green jacket. I say, well, it looks green to me, but all that it is that it has the chemical and the mineral and the makeup to reflect light in such a way that it activates the green spectrum in my cones, and I see green. There's no green there. That's why I learned about this in Australia with opals. When people started looking at opals, they saw that inside that opal were the flashing colors. And they all wondered, what mineral is there in the opal that causes this beautiful flashing colors? So if you have a ring and you move it, it's sometimes red, it's sometimes green. And at first people started sawing into the opals, trying to analyze and find out what was causing the color. It's just silicon. There's no color in an opal at all, none. There's no mineral in there that makes that color. It's only the structure of the silica that reflects the light in a certain way. That's all it is. The physics of light gives us color. Our experience of color then is, in one sense, empty. But it's beautiful. I like it. I'd love to see it now. But it's the idea of what it is quite different from what I think I'm experiencing in just normal life. With our children, we're always telling our children, they need to become individuals. They need to find out that they are an individual. We want them to have an ego. I don't think we need to worry too much. I think most children have an ego, but we put them in front of a mirror, and I remember doing this with my own children. You put them in front of a mirror, and they try to figure out what it is they are experiencing, because here's this other thing over there. And then you'd say to them, that's you. Think what that requires of a child in terms of understanding that that virtual presentation in the mirror is actually a reflection reversed of themselves. We use that all the time. But the problem is that when we are constantly project on our seeing. We see, in a way, what we want to see. And we usually hear what we want to hear. We are able to control our experience to some degree because we interpret it. And we want to see ourselves as something that we perhaps are not. Or we look at ourselves and think, and I have to say this is happening to me, as I get to be such an old man, and I look in the mirror and I think, how'd that happen? Was not in my plan. I don't know how I let myself do this. It's shameful. How could I let myself go to this level? I look at it and I, can that really be me? That's because we are constantly living with a virtual reality which we take to be permanent and fixed. And it's that fixity when we begin to realize it isn't fixed. And for a lot of people, this is fearful. It's really scary to think, whoa, there's no control here. Nothing is fixed, not even color and not even what I'm looking at. And you're telling me that I'm structuring it and I'm changing it, and my look at it, my interpretation is going to be quite different than anybody else's. For 20-some years, I knew a scientist at Berkeley, spent his whole research career trying to study what happens when a rabbit sees and smells food. And he spent all these times with the rabbits, and he figured out exactly where in the brain the spark was when they saw their food. And he could do it. But he realized that, and in his research changed a lot of the ways in which people think about how we really experience things. The rabbit only opened that door for about 1/10 of a second. That's all it needed. After that, the rabbit, everything is internal. The rabbit begins to think about that food without ever looking at it again. And we do the same. We think we are continually looking, but in fact, we don't have to do that because our brain is processing it from memory, from everything that we already know. So that's why you can drive a car and not think about it at all. It's a little worrisome, but you can be driving down the freeway, and I will guarantee you that most of the people you see driving 80 miles an hour are not consciously driving. They're on automatic pilot because they've driven so long, they know their brain has just taken over, and they're thinking about what they're going to do tomorrow, or what they're going to eat for dinner, or they're thinking, why is this person in front of me so slow, and they're having road rage, or whatever it is. We don't need, just like the rabbit, we don't need a very much. The rabbit and ourselves, most of what we experience in the sensorium is already what we process in our own brains. And that says that we don't always see the external. Psychologists are always complaining. They're saying, you try to tell somebody something that would be really helpful if they just listened, but they can't hear it. Why can't they hear what's being said? But that's the nature of how we all are. We are processing mostly from what is already in us, so we don't need a lot of information from the outside. We really don't. And we don't get that much. We think we do, but we don't. So let's look at some of the senses. Smells. What makes the smell of something wonderful? Who determines what smells good? Most of what we do is learned. We are told, this flower smells good. I had an experience, I stopped driving up by Bakersfield one day at the almond orchards. You know, there are thousands of acres of almonds, and in the spring when they blossom, I mean, the odor is overpowering. And we think it's a delicious, wonderful odor. But I tell you, if you stand there in one of those groves with those thousands of trees, you feel like you're going to smother from it. It's too much. Even smell that we can love at one point turns into the opposite. That's why the Buddhists say there is suffering. Why? There is suffering because nothing stays wonderful. You do it long enough and hard enough, and after a while, it's not wonderful. You take a walk, it's very nice. You walk for 20 miles, it's not so nice. Sitting down can be really wonderful. You sit on the flight from Singapore, 15 hours, it's not so nice. Everything has this changing quality to it, so it does not have a fixed nature of good or bad either. It's amazing when you look at the nose. The nose is a very complex thing. When I think of how we smell, it is so complex, and the way in which the nose picks it up, and even taste. Without the nose, you don't taste some things. Taste and the nose go together. We live in this sensorium which is made up of an incredibly complex operation of human body parts. So, I don't know how many of you know durian. Some of you do. You either love that smell or it makes you sick to your stomach. That's why you get these hotels and they have this big sign, no durian. And people have still taken it into the hotel because they like it, and you can smell that somebody's eating durian, and the hotel staff is out trying to sniff to find out who it is and throw them out because it gets into the air conditioning system and everybody gets to share the smell of durian. Cinnamon rolls. When my wife and I were looking years ago when we were first buying a house in Berkeley, we went into the house that we finally did purchase, and the woman had just baked cinnamon buns. And it was such a wonderful, when I smelled that, it was like, I've come home. And then a realtor said, oh yeah, I always tell everybody, bake cinnamon rolls before they bring people to see your house. I guarantee it'll sell your house every time. People love the smell of cinnamon rolls. In other words, our interpretation of what that smell is the important thing. When you look at what's physically going on in the nose, it's nothing to do with cinnamon, and it's nothing to do with good or bad or sweet or sour. The tongue is just as complex for us. We use it to talk, but we also use it, of course, to taste. So when is taste pleasurable and when is it pain, you know? And a sensorium is very difficult. Some people say the human is the only animal that eats something which hurts it.
Right.
Only the human eats hot spice. No animal ever wants to eat hot spice. Why do we like hot spice? Because it is an acquired taste. We learn to love it. We feel we haven't eaten certain kinds of food unless there's a little bit of heat there. And if you're, like a friend of mine in Korea said, if I don't have something hot, it's like my brain says, when are you going to eat? Doesn't matter how much I've eaten, the brain keeps telling you, eat something. Has to have just that little burn to convince the brain, aha, you've eaten. Cilantro, very interesting. I happen to love cilantro. Julia Child, who was one of the famous chefs in the U.S., hated it. Julia Child said if somebody puts a bunch of cilantro in front of it, throw it on the floor and stamp on it. It tastes like soap and it smells even worse. Well, a researcher got interested that Julia Child would turn against something which is so popular in cuisine and asked the question, why would she do that? And he discovered that it's genetic. There is a genetic spike for people who cannot stand cilantro. It's built into their genetic system. So their system is, in the sensorium, is telling them, that's a terrible taste, throw it away. And the person over here is saying, I love it. It gives exactly the flavor that I want. I eat it every day and I put it in everything that I cook. In other words, the sensorium is being interpreted all the time. We are interpreting and manipulating it in terms of what we're taught. So if you look at the pathway of smell and taste which overlap each other and interact, there's no possible way that we can really fully understand what happens when we taste and smell. It's very complex, and it's physical. And things are working in our bodies, and we are predisposed to some of it, and we are against some of it, and we interpret it in all kinds of ways. But our brain tells us, I'm smelling the durian fruit, and the durian fruit's up there, and I'm smelling it. So as the Buddhists long ago recognized, in the sensorium, the brain puts it all together. The brain mixes it up, the brain does whatever it does with it. And that's why, again, in the sutras, why would it say, no eye, ear, nose, taste, tongue? Over and over. Saying the sensorium which we live with, we have to recognize from one perspective, what we are experiencing has nothing to do with what we think we're experiencing as the durian odor. Hearing is even more remarkable to me. It doesn't start with chemical or electrical stuff, it starts with a vibration. How subtle can you get a vibration? The air, it's vibrating through the air. And a whole process by which that vibration gets translated into something which we call sound. Remarkable, truly remarkable. By the time you get through that whole, it's like spaghetti. By the time you get through all of that and you've got sound, it cannot possibly be the original vibration. So in the ear, these little tiny hairs suddenly rise up, make a cone, and they vibrate. And when they vibrate, I hear. Recently I discovered something. When they got magnification of this, they discovered that at the root of the base of all of those little hairs are minute, tiny little bits of silica. And if those silica things get out of place and float into the inner ear, you're going to be so dizzy you can't stand up. And there are people who went for years with dizziness, thinking that it was their blood pressure, it was their heart, it was something else. And now they've discovered for many people who have dizziness, it's the little silica chips in their ear. And you can go to the doctor and he will manipulate you like this for about an hour, and they'll be back in place. And your dizziness is gone. What causes the sensorium to tell me that I'm dizzy? My experience is the room is revolving. And yet it's something so minor as those tiny little things in my inner ear. So how you interpret sound is completely personal. Young people have their own music, we say. It's usually, these days, loud, deafening, say. I love classical music. When my son was growing up and playing the saxophone, he felt very sorry for me because it was obvious that I had no musical taste whatever, because very little saxophone music was ever dealt with in classical music, so it couldn't be very good. If you drive along someday, have your radio set to the music station, whatever it is, and turn it on suddenly. When you turn it on, the first sound you hear will be noise. You will not hear music. Your brain has to hear enough that it can interpret and say, this is music. This is not noise. This is music. But a single thing of music is noise in one sense. It's the sensorium, again, that gives us our experience. So the brain functions quite differently when it's seeing and when it's hearing. It has all kinds of ways to deal with the sensorium. And basically what we're saying with all of this is that whether it's the body, whether it's the ear, whether it's the eye, that there is no, it is empty of the reality which we think we're experiencing. I take my finger here and I rub it against my hand, and it feels like I'm feeling the whole tip of my finger. But in fact, the fingertip only has about 12 little nerve ends. The brain makes it feel like it's the whole tip of my finger that I'm feeling. But actually, information is only coming from a few little spots. things that we feel which are not really the way they are, that is what the Buddhists were trying to say. Form is emptiness. Form is emptiness. Whether it's what you feel or taste or touch, whatever your sensorium experience is, it's empty of the thing itself. It's just simply not there. So you can get a massage, it feels wonderful, you get hit in the face, and the tactile sensation is horrible. It depends on many factors as to how you are going to respond to any of this. So our mind is a sense organ. It's organizing all of this for us. It's hearing, tasting, smelling. It tells me that I'm seeing beautiful colors and I'm delighting in it, and that's one of the nice things. You can delight in seeing the color, and at the same time, intellectually, I can think, but there's no color out there. It's just reflected light, but it still looks beautiful. I still enjoy it. It doesn't matter. But if you don't know about it, then you become convinced about a reality which is not there. That's what the Buddhists are constantly saying. They differ from our science in this sense. The Buddhists say the mind is a sense organ. Just like the eye is a sense organ, they say mind, brain is a sense organ. It receives information just like any sense. It receives special information. It receives mental states. So if I dream when when you're sound asleep, you're deaf, you're blind, you're numb. None of those sensory information is coming through if you're sleeping deeply, but yet the brain is able to give itself its own mental images. So it's got mental images that are flowing in the dream state without any input from the outside. And if you get input from the outside, the brain will desperately try to understand what was that big boom. And if you're dreaming, it'll translate it into a little story for you, which is, again, has no reality. Why is the soul important? Bhikkhu Nanananda has, I think, said it very well. Buddhism traces the idea of a soul to a fundamental error in understanding the facts of experience. In other words, the idea of an Atman, of a self, of a soul, if you want to use his words, is because we do not understand what we are experiencing. And we think, I am seeing you. And I am here and you are there. But the experience is totally in here. That is a complete fabrication of my brain. Works beautifully. Keeps me alive. This is why they continue to say the sensorium is the beginning point of reaching a state of enlightenment. Because you have to understand the facts of experience, otherwise you're going to believe in things that are not so. You're going to believe in a permanent self. You're going to believe in a distinct this self and as opposed to that self. So eventually the Buddhists are able to say that nirvana is not essentially different from samsara, just like form is emptiness. And samsara is not essentially different from nirvana. There's not the slightest difference whatsoever. How could that be? I fell down and hurt myself. That's surely not nirvana. I break a leg. That can't be nirvana. But if we understand human experience, then we have to understand that the difference between one experience and another experience is not different in terms of what the process is that's going on. It's the same thing happening with those sparks and chemicals in our brain. One of them we experience as pain, we hate it. Something else we experience as bliss, we love it. But from one perspective, in terms of the sensorium, there's no difference. So that's why the sensorium allows people to see that this world and blissful state are not different. So what happens at the end of the Heart Sutra? Avalokiteshvara, looking down on the world of experience, saw that form is emptiness, emptiness is form, saw that there is no eye, ear, nose, taste, touch, really. There's no object of the eye, there's no object to the smell or the... So all of that, saw the sensorium is something which deludes us all the time. In that respect, he has overcome what can upset, and in the end, he attains nirvana. In other words, if you read the Heart Sutra, you are reading the story of the sensorium. And when you read the story of the sensorium, it's saying to you, this is really important. You must not think that this is unimportant. That when you make the essence of the whole of the Prajnaparamita, why would you take as the essence of the whole of that great philosophical and religious text, the sensorium? Why would that be the essential thing which you would put into the Heart Sutra? Because from their perspective, when Avalokiteshvara fully understands the human experience and what this experiential sensorium is, then he can overcome what can upset. He fully understands the nature of experience, and understanding that, in the end, he can attain to nirvana. So, no eye, ear, nose, no forms, sounds, no sight organ element, all of these sensorium are all negated in this sutra. This tiny little sutra takes them all on and says, no, no, no. Says form is not different from emptiness. The form I see and the emptiness of that form are just one and the same. So, from this perspective, in the sensorium, we do see emptiness. That's what we're seeing right now. And seeing this emptiness is really important. To understand seeing emptiness is, according to this text, to understand that is to begin the step that leads toward enlightenment and nirvana. Thank you very much.